Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jenny ABEL, Program Manager for Financial Security and a member of the Professional Development Committee of the African American Employee Resource Group, affectionately known as AAERG. Thank you for sharing your lunch hour with AAERG. The AAERG purpose is to serve as a resource for and foster current and future African American colleagues' success by sponsoring programming, providing collegial support, encouraging belonging, and raising a collective voice related to issues that impact employees' ability to thrive personally and professionally. We would love your feedback and will provide a link to a survey in the chat box as we close out this session. I'd like to acknowledge AAERG leaders. Our chair is Dr. Danielle Hairston-Green. The co-chair for the Professional Development Committee is Don Danita Fleary-Simmons. Rick Mills is our Secretary and Members and Events Committee Coordinator. Eva Terry is our Treasurer. James Bowling is Head of the Retention and Recruitment Committee. And Haiwania Thompson leads our Marketing and Media Committee. Our theme today is challenges and opportunities for Black students in the transition from high school to post-secondary education. And we are joined by 4 expert panelists who will be sharing valuable insights on this topic. I'm honored to introduce you to them, and I'll go in alphabetical order as I share some information about their backgrounds. Mrs. Gail Ford's introduction begins with one of my favorite quotes. If you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. If you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And that's a quote from Lilla Watson, an Aboriginal elder, activist, and educator. Mrs. Gail Ford was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan as one of 11 siblings. Ford's non-traditional upbringing with limited resources pushed her to claim her power or become a victim of her circumstances. Ford received her Master's of Science in Adult Education from the University of Wisconsin-Platteville and her bachelor's degree in Applied Speech Communication from Ferris State University in Big Rapids, Michigan. During her time at Ferris State University, Ford began her practice as a motivational speaker with Towers, teaching others what establishes real success. Ford has spoken across the country to audiences using her personal story to provide inspiration, motivation, and guidance to help others move towards a better life. Over the past 18 years, Ford has worked in nonprofits and post-secondary institutions to advocate for systematic changes to better align K-12 education programming with college-ready expectations. In 2019, Ford assumed the role of Director of the Pre-College Enrichment Program for Learning Excellence, or PEOPLE, at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, the university's most successful venture in diversifying its campus. Her work with youth and professionals afforded her the opportunity to attend First Lady Michelle Obama's Beating the Odds Summit at the White House in July 2015. In 2017, Ford was named by Brava magazine a woman to watch for her exceptional work in the area of college access. Ford wants every student to rethink their potential and use education as a path forward to fulfill their destiny. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Joaquina Scott Kankam, Ph.D. Joaquina Scott Kankam is the Director of School of Solutions Management Consultancy. Joaquina helps people and organizations create a better tomorrow through expert advice and recommendations in evaluation planning and development, compliance, and risk management. She also specializes in building effective systems for pre-college outreach programs and combined all areas of her expertise to develop and validate an instrument to measure the quality of pre-college outreach programs for her dissertation research study. Dr. Kankam has worked to improve people's lives through education for more than 15 years. Her career philosophy is doing what the organization needs me to do so that I will always do what is best for others. Joaquina's primary goal is to help people develop a love for learning as much as she loves learning. Outside of work, Joaquina's sole focus is her son, Jordan, and she enjoys hosting monthly virtual family events for all her relatives. To learn more about Dr. Kankam and School of Solutions, please visit www.theschoolofsolutions.com. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Constance Miles. Constance is originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and moved to Madison, Wisconsin in 1987 to begin her graduate degree at the UW-Madison in special education. She holds a BA in telecommunications from Michigan State University and an MA in special education. Her career as an educator spans over 30 years and has involved working with students from preschool through the collegiate levels. Constance has served as administrator, teacher, and in various positions in student services. Her heart is for students who have academic challenges. These challenges range from financial hindrances, not understanding how to navigate the collegiate admissions process, academic disabilities, non-familial support, and inadequate academic preparation. Constance is a mother of 2 adult children and loves to travel. She also recently has pursued a second passion and has become a real estate agent. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Alvin Thomas, who is a clinical psychologist focused on the risk and protective factors for boys situated in conditions that imperil them toward negative outcomes. His work exists at the intersection of positive child and youth development and father involvement. More broadly, he also studies ethnic identity, father engagement, and the mental health of Black men and boys. He focuses on risks and protections for Black children and youth, especially boys, and explores outcomes including violence, academic performance, and well-being. He is interested in influencing fatherhood policy to highlight father involvement for Black and underrepresented families and for fathers across other contexts. Currently, he is exploring gaps in diversity training specifically related to father, non-resident involvement in service provision to their children, as well as aggressive behavior, adolescent social media use, and the health implications of police stops for Black youth. He also helps to lead the weekly online mental health discussion group, specifically for Black men to share their anxieties in a supportive space and learn research-based tools for managing their health throughout and beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. An alumni fellow of the International Max Planck Research School on the Life Course and the Health Equity Leadership Institute, his work has earned numerous awards, including the Rackham International Student Fellowship, Patricia Gorin Research Award, Center for the Education of Women Graduate Scholarship, first man to receive an award from the center in its 40-year history, and the Rackham Graduate Student Research Grant, the last of which he used to pilot an intervention aimed at addressing mental health needs of juveniles in state custody in his homeland, St. Lucia. He is currently the scholar in residence in the Center on Poverty and Social Policy at Columbia University and a recent recipient of the Wisconsin Partnership Program's $1 million impact grant with his community partners, Urban League of Madison and Rebalance Life Wellness Association, for exploring the mental health of Black men and boys in the state of Wisconsin. Thank you all for taking the time to be with us today. I have a few questions to which I'll ask each of you to respond, after which we'll open it up for questions from attendees. The first question I'd like to pose is, when thinking about young adults making the transition from high school to higher education, what do you think are some important considerations for African American students? And I'm going to go in the order that I see folks on my screen. So Dr. Thomas, if you wouldn't mind starting, and I'll go ahead and add that question to the chat too.
Thank you, Jenny, for the introduction, a very generous introduction, and thank you for the invitation to speak with your, well, to have this conversation with your audience. I am looking forward to hear what the other panelists have to say because of the other areas of intersection as far as the work that they do. But I think when I think of Black kids transitioning from high school to college, I automatically start thinking of the experiences that have brought them to that space, the specific questions that they may have that are important to them, the areas of interest that they're showing passion for exploring, and then thinking of how the spaces that they're about to inhabit are going to welcome them, and in some cases not welcome them. I start to think of the resources that they're coming in with, and in some cases the mismatch between the resources and the new environment, the coping skills that they've learned in their previous environments, and the mismatch of those coping skills in some of the new environments. So one of the common things I remember I have seen, let me backtrack and say that I taught middle school, elementary school, and high school for a combined 9 years. And then also taught undergrad at Michigan and grad in Palo Alto in California. And one of the things that I remember seeing across the board, especially for Black and first generation students, is that absence of social capital and academic capital. Stepping into academia, into academic spaces, even at the undergraduate level, is a whole new alien world. It's a whole different ball game. And often students, we rightly push and encourage our high school students to reach for higher, to expand their knowledge, to expand their borders, and pursue undergraduate education. And usually the handoff from high school to college, that baton gets dropped. So the kids get into these schools and they suddenly are hit with this reality that there's nobody here, or there are very few resources here that are that specifically prioritize you, your specific background, your specific interest. And I think our responsibility is to make sure, one, that handoff is warm, but two, to make sure that the spaces that these kids are stepping into have been deliberately reimagined. I think often we think of, there's this great discussion about refunding and defunding, reimagining and defunding the police. And might sound weird, but I would call for reimagining and defunding our education systems. To a paradigm that prioritizes these kids, creating systems that actually look like these kids. A lot of our systems are still based on exactly what they were designed to do 30, 40, 100 years ago. We've slapped some paint on it, we've sparkled some holes, but under the bones of the organization, the structure of the organization is still what it was meant to do 100 years ago. So I hope we have some time to kind of delve a little bit deeper into that.
Great, thank you, Dr. Thomas. And sorry, it took me a second to remove my mute. Mrs. Ford, if you would be willing to go next to address that question.
Sure. Thank you, Jenny, for the introduction, and to the whole team for inviting me today. This is there's a lot of answers to this question. I would just start by telling you a little bit about my background and how I ended up in college. My sister, originally I'm from Detroit, you heard that in my bio, but I also was in foster care. My parents were both victims of the crack epidemic in Detroit, Michigan. You heard in my bio that I have 11 siblings, and I'm the oldest of of a set of 9, and then I have other siblings that were outside of my mom and dad's relationship, but we all grew up as one big family. And being a student who was in foster care for a time and then was eventually adopted by family members, college was, when I was growing up, I wasn't going to grandparents' university on my campus, right? Where siblings day, where I was going to college and had exposure to these things. as a young kid. And so the good thing about my experience and how I actually got to perceive and understand that college could be for me was that my younger sister was in a pre-college program, and my grandmother begged the coordinator of that program at the time, and he probably should not have done this because I work in the field now, so I know this is probably like against all procedures and protocols. If I could also attend the programming with my sister, which included a few overnight visits to the institution that I ended up getting my bachelor's degree from. And he graciously agreed to allow me to come along. That was the only college that I applied to because it was the only college that I had exposure to. And so one of the big things we really need to understand that goes on in the psyche of a student like me, right, who's had this journey, has come to this point and now working in college access work, is imposter syndrome. You all may have heard of that before, but you have to get over your own confidence barrier in your mind that you don't belong there, because this is totally different from the environment that you grew up in. I'm also a firm believer that I've never met a student who didn't want to learn or who didn't want to go to college or pursue some type of post-secondary plans to be a productive citizen, but it's more than about the desire. They have to know the process and have to know the how. Dr. Thomas talks about social capital. That is so super important. I think also sometimes we expect students to come into the college environment knowing certain things instead of prioritizing their role as a learner and as a student. Our environment should be set up for them to learn how to adult and to be a college student, as opposed to thinking they're already going to come in the door and understand how to navigate financial aid, how to navigate the campus, how to figure out how I'm going to eat and pay my bills and what's the best option for me, etc. And so I think that the resources that we provide for students of color has to match the learning curve that they may have, not because it's their fault per se, right? We are still talking about children who a lot of them have no control over the circumstances that they are in. We need to create and design an entry experience for them and a resource pathway for them to be able to make it successfully through the system that was not really designed for them. We also have to, as staff, check our biases, right, about students of color, what they're capable of, expecting their experience to be the whole experience of their entire race. It's a very nuanced question and approach that has to be taken, but there are some very broad things that we could do to make sure that our systems are not set up with the assumptions that most people have about minorities in this country, and we're not replicating that oppression as we bring students into our space. And so I know we have a lot of other panelists, so I'll hold my comments there. And thank you, Jenny, for the question.
Thank you so much. Ms. Miles, could you go next?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again, Jenny, for that introduction. I am really pleased to be here this afternoon. Like Ms. Ford mentioned, this is a multifaceted response to this question. The first thing that I want to bring in, I know the question mentioned from high school to college, but the college preparation needs to start way before the high school level. I'm a true believer that even at the elementary level, but definitely at the mid-school level, our students, particularly our Black students, really need to start having those discussions, start having those exposures. High school level, when you, at that point, it's not too late, but it definitely needs to be preparedness before then. One of the big challenges, and I'll speak to as a college advisor, I worked for Operation Fresh Start a few years ago. And for those that don't know, Operation Fresh Start is a local alternative high school in the city of Madison. Students receive their high school diploma via a contract with the school districts in learning, construction, and conservation. Many of our Black students come into that program very ill-prepared for high school and very, very, very ill-prepared for college. Although the desire is there, the basics aren't there. We'll talk about the lack of academic preparedness coming from their high schools. We'll talk about the financial preparation. Financial preparation is something that, even though that they have the desire, a lot of our students just don't understand. One of my roles was to get them through the financial aid application, which required familial support, which is another issue that a lot of our students are lacking. First-time generation students don't necessarily have the family support because their parents, their siblings and that have never been to high school, so they don't know how to help them navigate that world. And then they don't necessarily have the teacher and counselor support at the high school level. A lot of our Black students do not have teachers and counselors that look like them or do not give them the motivation and the encouragement and the expectation. The lack of expectation is very much real for our Black students in our high schools. The bar is set very low for them, and they don't have anything necessarily to reach for. Ms. Ford mentioned that the fact that I'm gonna really piggyback on this, the actual opportunity to explore secondary colleges. One of my roles as college advisor was to, if nothing else, have them set foot on our local campuses, the Madison College, our UW-Madison, University of Wisconsin-Madison. A lot of these students, it was the first time that they had ever experienced that, whether that was something they were considering or not. I truly believe the exposure to college campuses is a must for them to even have that thought process in their hands, in their minds. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Miles. Dr. Kankam.
Hi, thank you. Before I get into what I'm going to talk about, I would like to explain my background to you a little bit. I started by teaching in K through 12. I've taught almost everything from pre-K to 8th grade, almost every subject. In addition to that, I have spent time as an instructional coordinator where I would plan campus-wide instructional plans and maintain the daily operations of a campus to ensure success. From there, I taught in college, as well as provide statewide programming for extension in the area of 4-H, in particular college access. So this is one of those areas for me that's very personal. As Jenny mentioned, my dissertation study was all about college access and how we can create better systems to ensure that we are doing exactly what our programs are designed to do effectively. So to answer this question, I want to piggyback off of what Constance just said. And pre-college absolutely begins before high school, and it must begin by middle school, especially for kids that are in these lower income areas or Title I schools. By 6th grade, they should start to have some type of exposure to college access in order for it to really have a really big effect on them. In addition to that, we have to also consider how important the role of the family is. From the 1966 study from the Coleman Report, to now, the most important influence on a kid in school is family. And if we don't get the family involved in the process, then we're spinning our wheels and getting nowhere. So while we're not only exposing these young people to college access programs, we have to work to expose their parents to it as well, because many people do not have the experience. They don't even know how to matriculate through the system. They don't know how to apply. They don't know how to register for classes. They don't know anything. So while we are educating the young people, we have to work to educate the families as well, so that they can assist us in providing this exposure to young people. In addition to that, college access also continues even after they are accepted and enrolled into an institution of higher education. As in my role as a statewide program specialist, I I had to mentor and a lot of incoming freshmen through a scholarship program. And the thing that became very clear, very apparent from the onset was the fact that nobody knew what to do. No one knew what to do. No one knew who to talk to if they needed to change their classes. No one knew who to go to if they wanted to change their major. No one knew anything. They didn't know about a degree plan. They didn't know anything. And I took the role very personally. And I would literally walk with those students through every step of the process, from getting their classes changed, to getting their schedule changed, to getting their majors changed, to finding out how they can get book vouchers and where they need to go to get certain things set up for themselves. I was a part of that process. And that's the part that we often overlook, I think. And it's like we drop them off on a campus and we kind of just set them free. But that's where a lot of the problems begin. And if a kid is there and not really sure what to do, then it's easier to drop out than to try to figure it out in a lot of instances. So college exposure and college access, especially for young minority students and people of color, and it goes beyond just getting them into college. It goes all the way through to monitor their retention, to monitor, what programs they're involved with. Are they participating in internships that will help them once they graduate? Are they doing the right steps for workforce preparation in terms of resumes and interview skills and dressing the part? That all plays a role in it as well. So it doesn't just end once they get into college. It goes much, much, much further beyond that point. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much to all of you for your very thoughtful responses to that question. The next question that I have for you pertains to work that a group of us are doing on trying to start children's savings accounts throughout communities in Wisconsin. So given our interest in working with communities and parents of younger children and in having early conversations about establishing child savings accounts for higher education, do you have any suggestions for how to best establish two-way communication and a relationship of trust? And if it's okay, if we could go in reverse order of the speakers. So Dr. Kankam, if we could start with you for that question, and I'll go ahead and paste that in the chat too.
Okay, well, that caught me off guard. Anyway, I think the biggest thing, financial education, financial literacy isn't taught in schools at all. You might at the end get a class on how to write a check, even though nobody does that anymore, but it's not taught at all. And I know it's encouraging to say, hey, I got a bank account, but as we saw with this pandemic, if you're not putting money into it, a lot of times that bank account can hurt you because they're going to take out fees or they're going to withdraw. It's more about teaching how to not overspend, how to save, and how to save in a way that would profit you at the end of the day. It's easy from a lens of people who, we earn a check, or people who have money to spend. But when you are from a lower income area and you don't have a lot of money, you're not really thinking about a bank account because you don't have anything to put in there. So I think before we start pressing the issue about bank accounts, we need to teach revenue streams. We need to teach entrepreneurship. We need to teach what income is and how it can be generated with or without a college degree. I graduated from Tuskegee University, and Dr. Booker T. Washington's philosophy was to not only earn an income from your credentialing, but to also have a trade, so that if something happened with the income that you have through your education, then you always have a trade to fall back on. And I think those are the things that we need to start to impart upon these young people as much as possible, that before we get this bank account, let's talk about how we generate money and how do we make that income last, how we create sustainable streams of income. And that's where my focus is in terms of finance and financial literacy. And it's not just getting a job and not just having a bank account, but how do we make a real difference, not only in our lives, but future generations to come.
Great, thank you. Ms. Miles, could I turn it over to you?
Sure, I definitely concur. If your family is living paycheck to paycheck, it is hard for young people to think about savings. But I think where we need to go is to, right now, our young people, as we know, have an instant gratification mindset. And I think we need to, as parents, help our teenagers shift from that mindset. Everything is keeping up with the peers. I want it now. We need to, number one, be the example, because a lot of adults also have that instant gratification mindset. So we need to be the example. And if our children see us saving, they may be following in our footsteps. And I think what we also need to focus on, it's not really the amount. You could save a nickel out of a dime. It doesn't have to be a big amount. You could start a penny jar. It's just the idea of learning how to set something aside for something bigger and later down the road. It's a matter of changing your priorities. The fact of the matter of buying some new shoes or buying some new clothes or whatever does not necessarily need to be the priority. The priority needs to see, okay, so let's see what you might want to save up for future. And we're talking obviously for saving for college. First thing, we need to actually get our young people to think that college is in their reach. And then once we get that in their mind, at that point, that is something that they can actually shoot for. There is a couple of local organizations in the Madison area that actually work with young people. I apologize, I don't know. One of us is a teen millionaire organization run by, I believe, Dr. Nguyen, that actually teaches our young people about investing and saving. It's a free organization. Again, the resources and the knowledge needs to be out there for the families to know that these resources are out there. There's another organization that's strictly to follow up what was just said in the terms of entrepreneurial spirit. There is another organization out there for teenagers to actually start their little businesses. And they make their products and they actually go and have a competition and they sell their products. But again, it's that mindset that this is something that is worthwhile doing and a goal for our young people. I definitely agree that savings is something that we need to have our young people start thinking about instead of spending instantly. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Mrs. Ford, could we turn it over to you?
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. So I really, Dr. Kam's comments really resonated with me. I think that I want to specifically touch on the issue of trust, because if you're struggling to put food on the table and you're coming to ask me to start a savings account, that's obviously not my priority right now. And depending on our relationship, I don't even trust you with that information because I don't know what you're going to do with that, right? The health and safety and priority of my family now and making sure that we can stay together is what's going to be at the forefront of my mind. So I'm not going to, when you're engaging with families and you're saying like, I really would love to get you in this program to help you with savings for college, you may get a lot of, yes and okay, we'll be there. But what's going to take priority, just like in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is what their need is for that day. So one of the things that poverty really robs us of is the ability for us to engage and think about our future, because we're in the survival mindset that I've got to get through today. So that's why the pair of shoes is attractive right now, because this is going to give me the sense of identity and that hit of adrenaline that I need to validate my self-worth right now in the moment. Not 4 years from now going to college. I'm just not there, right? And that's not because they don't want to be there. It's just that that's the nature of the circumstances that they're in. So when I arrive at the door, I haven't had time, unless somebody has come to take that time with me, and I have the time to invest and engage with them, to think about, you know, how do I put away, you know, 50 cents today so that can benefit me tomorrow? The reality is we have to fix the plane while the plane is also moving, because their life is not going to stop. So when you're talking about savings, it may not be realistic for them to engage with you in a savings plan. They don't got it. Like, it's not there. The money is not there. They need that money to meet their immediate needs, and that's what's absolutely going to take priority. So we have to find ways in our society to think future for them, so that when they get to that other place, we've made it the transition a little softer. The financial aid is already there, so they don't have to think about it, and so they don't have to figure out how to earn it, and they know how to easily get it. Because we're in the generation of TikTok, Snapchat, and I'm not saying any of those things are bad. I actually think they have a lot of value in our society for teaching some really important lessons in a short amount of time. It's just that we haven't caught up, and we're not moving at that speed in the large education systems that we have set up. Our kids are, though, and their minds absolutely are. So we have to figure out ways to educate them in the ways that those platforms do that really captivate and grab their attention. We have to adjust there as well, but specifically on the issue of trust, especially with systems in America that were designed not for people of color, and in many ways to hinder them and prevent them from forward movement and progress. There's always going to be a hesitation and that barrier that has to be broken down of trust before I can authentically engage with you around a topic of money, because and how that's going to impact my family. And I'm bringing some of my personal experiences to the table. We were strictly told in our household a lot of, you don't go to school and tell people what's going on in your house, because I don't want CPS at my door, etc. And that's not the experience of every person that's Black. I also want to be clear about that. Black is not a monolith. People of color are not a monolith. There are different experiences, right? This is just what mine was. My child will have a different experience because I'm in a different place. But every generation that goes a little bit higher, there are still barriers to overcome because we're 400 plus years behind. Now, specifically talking about Black students. But trust is a really huge issue. It's why we often say that our students of color have to see people that look like them and have the same lived experience as them, because it helps to get to the goal faster. If I don't have to already think in my mind, are there racial undertones here? Who are you? Can I trust you? Why are you coming into my community? Do you want something from me? Am I safe? Because we have to think about the history pieces that are really playing into the whole ecosystem of how we move forward together. And I'm a total optimist, so I know that there is a way, right? It's why I'm working in this field so that I can do my part to do that. But we have to be honest about where we are, especially with some of these communities, if we're going to get to where we really want to be.
Thank you for that excellent information. Dr. Thomas, may I turn it over to you?
Oh, sorry, I had to unmute myself. So I think just all around really great points, and I probably will just try to sharpen around some of the edges of the points. So there may not be a lot, there will be a lot of overlap, but I think in some cases necessary overlap to heighten the message of some of those points. One, I want to bring the obvious elephant in the room to focus, and that is life expectancy for Black people in Wisconsin is significantly lower. So for men in general, it's about almost 70. In Madison, it's about 51, 52, right? For Black women, it's about 75, 76. For white women and white men, it's upwards of 77, 78 to 80, 83, 84. Right? For Hispanics, it's significantly higher. So there's an obvious disparity in life expectancy, how long people are expecting to live. And so if you're not expecting to live long, why would you be planning for much longer? COVID-19, according to the stats, just erased 3 years of life for Black people across the country. And so if you're not expecting to live long, why would you be concerned about planning for much longer? Black men, Black individuals, people of color are being killed. We're seeing it displayed across the screen. Again, if you could walk out on the street today and potentially die, what is the need for planning for much later? So there is a certain essence of fatalism that I don't expect to live very long. And a study done by some colleagues in Chicago was demonstrating that a lot of these African American men in urban and low income areas in Chicago were saying essentially, I don't know if I'm going to get to 25. So hell yeah, when I get $300, I'm going to buy my sneakers, because that's the sneakers I'm probably going to die in. I may not even wear out those sneakers. So to tell me to start planning for something that is 10 years down the line, that may not even happen, that I may not even be able to save enough for, is really, really a weird concept. And I think it's a concept that comes from where we are versus where they are. And there's a huge difference. I'm going to pull in now something that's a little bit more personal to me. I saved for more than 15 years. I started saving when I was 11 years old to go to college. I wasn't thinking college, but I was thinking I need to save money. So I would buy toys from the toy store, and I would upmark them and sell them around Christmas. I would buy candy and I would upmark it and sell it. And I was making my money that way. My friends loved playing marbles. I would buy marbles and take them out of the bag and sell them one by one and upmark them and make money. And by the time I was about 16, 17 years, and I'd been doing that for about 4 or 5 years, I had about almost $1,000. That's after 4 years. By the time I got a job, I started teaching, taught for 9 years. And even after teaching for 9 years, I had enough money saved up to pay for 1 year of undergrad. 1 year. And that was with my parents not demanding that I put money back into the family. They were gracious to say, you know what, take care of yourself. You're going to live in this house for free, contribute to food every now and then, live in this house for free, and save your money. Their thing was, you're going to save your money to go to buy a house, to eventually move out on your own. Eventually it became for college. But I had spent more than 15 years saving, and I still didn't have enough to pay for 2 years, half of my college education. The rest was going to be accomplished through scholarships. And so when we go to individuals with these very nice sounding ideals, we have to recognize that those are middle-class ideals. We're selling middle-class ideals, middle-class values to individuals who don't have the middle-class means. And so before we can start asking people to move up, we have to provide the stepping stones for them to move up on. We have to provide the steps for them to step up on. So we're asking people to come higher, and they're looking around saying, come higher with what? I'm still trying to pay for this this little apartment. I'm still trying to keep my kids in school. I am working 3 jobs, minimum wage. And you telling me that I have to come to another meeting to discuss saving money? Saving what? We don't have money to save. And even if we were to save, you're talking about we save $1 a day. That's not going to pay for the college for the 2 kids who I have coming immediately now and the 2 I have coming after that. So I think we have to be realistic, and we have to also recognize priorities. This is not to say, though, that our responsibility is not also to provide some financial literacy to families. Every individual should be able to understand how these financial worlds intersect with the rest of our worlds, the different parts of our worlds. But I think we need to put in place, and again, this is the part that nobody likes to hear. Resources have to be prioritized for that. We can't expect people to save what they don't have. So it means that we have to very deliberately and unashamedly throw the resources at them and say, here are the resources. So if you're low income and you're working a minimum wage job, we want to make sure your kid can get into college. So as part of your employment, your employer is responsible for putting aside a certain amount of money for your kid's education. That way your kid doesn't end up in that same job when they graduate. That's money that we can start saving. That's how we can start helping parents think, because now it suddenly looks real. Every month, $100 goes towards my kid's education. Hell yeah, I'm going to come to a meeting to discuss that, because that's $1,200 by the end of the year. By the time my kid gets to 16, 17 years old, that's enough money to really have a shot of going to college. So hell yeah, I'm showing up for that meeting, because that's money. But you tell me I need to go and scrape my pockets and scrape the sofa to find a few pennies, and that's going to make a difference for me or for my child. You just added more work to my life. All right? Schools need to step in. It's not enough for University of Wisconsin-Madison and every other school to say we're going to recruit students and we're going to provide a few scholarships for students. It has to be more than that. If we really are interested in diversifying the body of our students, then we have to step in and say, what is this community? We have a Madison community, we have rural communities, we have Milwaukee communities. Let's go in there and figure out how many kids are in there. Let's check with the high schools and how much money out of our endowments. That's where the rubber hits the road. How much money of our endowments are we really interested in investing into these individuals? And those individuals eventually become Madison students or students at another college. But it has to go beyond the fancy language and the cute named programs. It has to go beyond that. It has to be actually dipping into our deep pockets and making financial donations, financial contributions to these causes. I'm done. I'm going to step off my soapbox.
Thank you so much to all of you for those very thoughtful responses. We're going to transition into questions from participants, from the group as a whole. Before we do that, I know that some people are going to have to jump off in the next 10 minutes. I just want to remind everyone that we recently added a new aspect to these Wisdom Wednesdays, an additional half hour for further discussion. So if you can stick around until 1:30, that would be great. For those that do have to drop off, I just want to share really quickly what our theme and speaker are going to be in May. On May 12th, our topic will be emotional intelligence, and our speaker will be Will Latif Little, who's a mentor, activist, poet, motivational speaker, transformation expert, and author. So that should be an excellent presentation. Hoping that everyone can make that on May 12th. So with that, I invite everyone to go ahead and ask questions. You can either put them in the chat or unmute yourself. And Pat Malone, I know you asked a question early on in the chat, and I think it was in response to one of the speaker's comments, and I don't recall which speaker. So Pat, I wonder if you want to unmute yourself and share a little bit more about that question.
Jenny, I can't remember asking a specific question. I just remember putting in comments. I think it had something to do with how much of what we're talking about you know, with that transition from high school to post-secondary has so much to do with the opportunity gaps that exist in primary and secondary schools. And I know sort of the language actually talks about it being an achievement gap, but, you know, when you look at it, it looks more like an opportunity. It's like, you know, give people opportunities, don't cut them out because of color or ethnicity or anything like that. And I sit on a school board, and it is something that we spend a lot of time thinking about, because if you don't provide opportunities, you can't expect anybody to move forward. You just can't. So that was as much of a question as it was.
Any panelists have any thoughts or reflections to add on to that?
I have a thought and a reflection. Just like what Patricia just said about opportunity gaps, it goes beyond just money. You know, a lot of lower income individuals live in not only food deserts, but education deserts as well, where there's no institutions of higher education within miles of them. So I was one of the fortunate ones that grew up in Third Ward, Houston, Texas, where I was surrounded by Rice University, University of Houston, and Texas Southern University. So I could walk and visit or look and see these campuses on a regular basis. But there are a lot of people who don't have that access, who don't have the opportunity. And without those opportunities to even get the kids to the campuses so that they can see them, you're left without. Like, and it's kind of, it's personal because naturally I'm a Black person, but it's hard to get a lot of people to understand that just because the Civil Rights Act has been in place now since 1964, and just because slavery ended in the late 1800s, and just because Jim Crow no longer exists in the South, to say, you know, that everything is the same and everybody's on an equal playing field and everybody, you know, has an opportunity and everybody can become whatever they want to become. And it's just not that easy. You know, Black kids are dealing with trauma that comes from generations ago. It stems from years ago. 400 years of slavery does not end in 40, 50 years. No matter how much progress we make, no matter how many Black presidents and vice presidents we have, that generational trauma that has been brought upon us exists, and it will be there for many, many, many years to come. So what we really need is more advocates and more allies of people who don't pity the Black community, but understand that this is a long journey. It's not a quick, swift response to solving an instant problem. This is a generational problem that came hundreds of years ago, and it will probably take us hundreds of years to truly fix. And those opportunities do not exist because the system designed to provide those opportunities have designed it in a way where it's almost unreachable for the people who need it the most. So we just need more allies. We need more people who don't sympathize or feel pity for the Black community, but those who really want to see change happen and work to make that change happen.
Great. I see, oh, Dr. Thomas, did you have some?
Yeah, I saw Chelsea's question in the chat.
Yeah, I was just going to read her question. That's an excellent.
So Chelsea, I think the gift, one of the gifts that we will have from this COVID-19 pandemic is that it has taught us that we have other ways of connecting to people. this ability to connect with individuals virtually is really powerful and can be a useful resource. And I hope that we don't throw it by the wayside when we hopefully bounce forward, not return to normal, because normal was never normal, when we bounce forward and improve ourselves. But I think if you are aware of human resources outside of that rural context that you can connect those families to, that would be very useful. In fact, I spent a few hours last night speaking with a family in California, because the kid just got into a number of colleges and is trying to decide which one she wants to go to. But she's not visited all of them. And so I was able, after speaking with her and kind of walking her through the financial piece, the emotional piece, the connection piece, the building community piece, the navigating academic spaces piece, all of those are different elements of orientation that Black kids are going to have to go through. Even if her mother works in a college and her mother has a college degree, she is still first generation, she's now essentially second generation. But being able to connect with individuals who have that experience to provide to those families and kids. And then I was able to connect her with a graduate from one of the universities that she's looking at, who can give us some very intimate detail about and history about the university, what it's like to be there physically. So I think we have ways that we can connect. Another way is to maybe reach out to the university itself. Look at some of the diversity and support resources that they have on campus and reach out to them and say, hey, I have a student that I think needs support. Are you able to provide that support? And if they aren't able to provide that support to that student, then that student doesn't need to be going to that school anyway. If you can't provide that support and reach out then that kid is not going to be at ease at that university, wherever that happens to be. And that's regardless of where the kid ends up deciding to go. Try to find resources from the university to provide that support might be useful.
Jenny, I had a question in case none of the other panelists were going to respond to that earlier one.
Sure, go ahead, Amy.
So I just put it in, I'll put it in the chat, but I'll read it. It's a little bit lengthy, I guess. The point is, I believe it's really hard to make an argument that we need to grant more funding towards scholarships and allow for greater access to higher ed when we don't know, like, really truly we don't agree on the why. Like, why does it really matter to the state of Wisconsin or UW-Madison or UW Parkside or whatever it may be? Like, why does it really matter to have greater diversity there? And there's so much like competition for scarce resources, and I just wish I knew how to like get my head around the why. Like, what is the success of a student look like? Okay, so maybe the student will graduate, maybe the student will stay in the Madison area, maybe the student will stay in the state of Wisconsin, stay involved as alumni. Like, what's the return for those funds? And I don't mean to make it sound like I don't believe that we should be doing that. The question is, like, how do we settle on the why and what success looks like? Alvin, yeah, sorry.
The thing I know that always seems to move legislators and individuals is money, greed. This is the why. A student or a child who grows up in poverty, who grows up with significant disadvantage, is likely to replicate that significant disadvantage and continue it for the next few generations. That child is likely to have lower income jobs, is more likely to have mental health issues, is more likely to have children at an earlier age, is more likely to engage in the illegitimate economy, which is eventually going to involve crime, which means that that's going to cost you some millions and billions on law enforcement and incarceration. It's going to cost you some millions and billions on extra support around psychological and mental health and health services. The monies that you're going to have to spend to patch a situation long term, it may look like a ton of money being spent immediately for the next 5 or 10 or 15 years. But that, when you compare that to the amount of money that you're going to be spending over the next 40 or 50 years on not just that one individual, but the repercussions that come out of that individual, that's the cost benefit outweighs or skews towards making the initial large investment. And again, it looks bad. If I go to a dentist and my dentist says, you've not been flossing, and it looks like you have 2 small cavities, you can bite the bullet and give me my $2,000 or $3,000 to fix, to go in and clean those 2 cavities and put in some crowns or whatever I need to do. I'm not a dentist. I don't know if it's crowns or what they do. Whatever that I need to do to address that. Or I could just clean it and send you home and not really do any fixing. You will be back here with me again in the next few months or years, not for a cleaning and a fixing this time, but for an extraction. And after the extraction, you will be back to me again because the teeth are going to start falling on each other and you're going to need braces. And after that, you're going to have the gum starting to grow out and we're going to need some more procedures for that. And after that, you might need some maxifocal facial surgery because your face is going to start slanting to the side. And after that, you might need some mental health surgery because you might start feeling anxious and self-conscious. And after that, you might need some of, it just keeps rolling on and on because I didn't have the foresight to realize that that $2,000 investment at the beginning, though it looked large, if I step back and allow myself to see the full forest, I realize that the tree is not the big issue, that the tree is just one small piece. And I think often we are so focused in our own minds, in our own comforts, that we don't see the forest because of the comfort of our own trees.
Excellent, excellent point, Dr. Thomas. And I will put a link in the chat to a report that recently came out about the economic impact that college graduates in the UW system has on the state. It's billions of dollars. To fund the students who go through the PEOPLE program, we start working with them in the 8th grade, and we work with them all the way through college graduation. But our pre-college program, to fund them through that program for 5 years is $6,400. The cost of a college or a high school dropout to the state of Wisconsin over their lifetime is $292,000 per person. We have to invest in prevention on the front end. I don't even want to say prevention. This is just the right thing to do. Because as Dr. Thomas has already put it, the economic argument cannot be understated or sold, the value. Now, some people think, well, I would just say prisons are profitable. Having a robust underbelly to society means that some people benefit off of that. That's how they feed their families. And we have to get over this notion that if I am successful, my success means that you will not be successful. It's a deficit, archaic way of thinking. That's not how this works. We define what happiness is, but if your happiness is only because you have your boot on my neck, then we've got to do something about that, right? Mm-hmm. We have to be that way. When we talk about the cost of higher education being so expensive, well, why is it so expensive? We can rebalance the books here, right? It doesn't have to be that a college degree has to cost you $50,000. Or if it is going to cost $50,000, I'd rather us invest in that $50,000 for a college degree than to invest in prisons, because I don't have a way to feed my family, which has driven me to illegal activity because it's the only way that I can survive. You all get it. But the economic impact cannot be understated, Amy. Look at that report. It would definitely give you the why if people only can see the dollars and cents and not the moral argument.
And if I could just add, to play a little devil's advocate, why not? What is the other priority over educating our young Black students that we could be focusing on? What is more important? I mean, you know, I even think many of you very well might be aware of the fact that even our Ivy League schools recognize that poor families deserve a free education. Any family making under, it varies between $150,000 to $175,000 a year. Now, again, you have to be academically admitted, but these schools are recognizing that we are giving you the financial support once you cross our doors. Free education for 4 years. And so the why is why not invest in our kids? We invest in so many other things that our society has deemed as a priority. Our kids are not our priority. That's our why. Our kids are our why. Our why is why we're here. We're educators because we love our kids and we see that it's worth investing in our kids. And more schools are, like I mentioned in the chat, UW-Madison has the Badger Promise. I believe it's under $65,000 a year, which a lot of our families make. They can get education for the free education for the first 2 years of their, and it's not academically based, it's strictly income based. Even I work for Madison College in the testing division. We also have a program called Scholars of Promise that our students can come in for free education. The question is, why not?
So I have a question, but I don't want to dominate. So other participants, other questions? I want to make sure there's room for others before I ask mine.
I did want to just make a comment to follow up with what Ms. Miles mentioned regarding need-based assistance with some of these Ivy League institutions providing free tuition for eligible students. Of course, you have to meet the criteria in terms of academia, but even at Harvard University, if your family makes less than $65,000 a year, and that's $65,000 a year, you are eligible to attend their school at no cost to you, pending that you meet the other criteria in terms of GPA. And in many institutions across the United States, the SATs are about to be something of the past. And so if we have those institutions like the Harvard universities, like the other HBCUs that are considered Ivy Leagues, like Spelman University and Howard University, offering those opportunities, then other institutions across the United States should consider that, especially our land-grant institution, who has an added value of just existing. Because we exist as a land-grant institution, there's financial support that we receive from the government and to the end of time. And so we do have the capacity to be able to provide those opportunities for young people who are in families that have limited income. And $65,000, I mean, that's beautiful to be able to approach a school like a Harvard University and say, I can see this as a possibility for me because my family meets that criteria.
Thanks, Danielle. So my question, you all made the excellent point that educating people in our communities is not sufficient to deal with this issue, that what we need is investment in communities of color. And because we are all, those of us who are on this Zoom are engaged in community education, I'm wondering what advice you might have for us about how we could incorporate some of those community investment conversations into the local community work that we're doing? How can we do that in the context of extension education?
Jenny? Outside of Revolution. You know, I keep thinking of, oh, and his name escapes me, but, you know, for example, community development educators have the opportunity through their work with chambers of commerce and economic development corporations and all those other things to begin the discussion of what the investment in our communities of color, what the investment in our children of color brings to them. Because, you know, Dr. Thomas talked about greed and you're like, yeah, you know, I get it. But it's like this, you begin that dialogue, you begin that conversation about what that investment looks like and the difference that it can make. I mean, that's clearly one place, an easy low-hanging fruit to start the discussion.
To add to Patricia, I would also like to say and include people, and I don't necessarily like the term people of color because I think it still polarizes the country and it makes it seem as if everybody is grouped into one group and white people are over here by themselves. So personally for me, I do not like that term. But I think the biggest thing is to include people of color in those discussions. If you're having these discussions and nobody of color is a part of it, then you're missing a whole perspective that can give you deep insight to what's really going on in these Black communities, in these minority communities. You have to be willing to invite somebody of color to the table, and not only invite them to the table, but allow them to speak and be willing to listen and hear what they have to say and not dismiss it because they're Black and they should not be speaking according to whatever philosophy or whatever you have in your brain, and they should not have any dominance in the conversation. They should not be a part of it because they are a person of color. You need to open your arms to listening to what people of color really have to say and take it seriously. And it's not a race card, and it's not us trying to make it, you know, Black against white. This is the reality. And the thing that kind of struck me the most, again, I've been knowing Dr. Danielle Hairston-Green for many, many years. We went through the Ph.D. program together. We worked in extension together. We were on the same interview panel for Sandra Bland. George Floyd went to my high school. And it wasn't until George Floyd's death that a lot of people were like, oh my God, I didn't know this existed. But if you would go back, because people never felt like they had to be a part of the Black community or even watch or pay attention or read anything that came out of the Black community. But if you would go back and read books by Black authors or watch Black television from the 70s and the 60s, the same messages that we are repeating over and over again have been on display for decades now, but nobody was willing to listen. Nobody was willing to hear it because it came from a Black person. So we have to change that. We have to start there. People of color have things to say. It's important that we learn to listen and we are receptive of the things that they have to say. And it's not to attack anyone. It's not to make you feel guilty. It's not to make you feel bad. It's just, this is our reality that nobody's paid attention to because you didn't have to. So I think it starts there. Invite us and then be willing to listen to us because we have a lot to say.
Thank you. Did folks see Monica's question in the chat and about social capital? And would anyone be willing to respond to that?
I could respond. I mean, social capital so for an example, I talked about earlier in my, I think when I was answering the first question that I was exposed to college because my sister was in a pre-college program. That's an example of social capital in my own household, where my sister had that access. Therefore, the social capital came to me. And there's things that you organically, your friend circle. Also, when Dr. Thomas talked about earlier, and a lot of the panelists have been talking about the process of knowing how to do things. And when you don't know how to do something, you go to your peer group to ask them, how do I fill out this financial aid paperwork? If your best friend who came up here with you doesn't know, your social capital then can't kick in and work for you in that way, right? And so it is the concept is as simple as having someone in your atmosphere and your ecosystem help with even those small questions that you may have. Because a lot of times when you're like, I don't know, that contributes to the imposter syndrome and the feeling that I don't need to be here. Nobody that I'm asking can help me and tell me what to do. I'm going back to what I know. Another example or thing that I learned, I brought up the stock market, I think, before in the chat, because it's just been amazing to me what I've learned over this past year about investing. But one of my friends, he's paying for his son to go to it's a majority white private school. His son came home and was telling him about how his dad taught him how to trade options, and he takes his allowance money and invested in the stock market every month. And man, I made $5,000 the other day. And he comes home and tells his dad, my friend took his allowance money and bought an option with it and made $5,000 on Tesla. Can I do that with my allowance money? His dad's like, what are you talking about? He has no clue about what he's talking about with this investing thing. He learned that by having access to social capital. So now his dad has found him an investing club for kids in his age and has put him in that group, but it never even would have been in his mind to do that for his kid at that age had that conversation not occurred between him and his peer at the school. And so some people have to work a lot harder to even get access to the information, let alone to execute. And when you have the social capital around you that at least gives you access to the information that I think someone said earlier, these are middle-class problems, or this is the middle-class life that we're talking about, and our lived experience is through that lens. Then if you don't even have access to the information based on the circle that's around you, you're not going to be something you can't see. You can't elevate to that level until you first have exposure to it. And there are, anomalies and unicorns to that. And sometimes I think that can be harmful to our communities, because you may look at somebody like me and say, well, Gail, you came from such and such background and now you have a college degree and I'm the one that made it out that has to go back to all the events and speak to the other kids on the block. But just because I had that experience and I was able to, I'm nowhere near where I would like to be, but at least I do have a degree and can provide for myself and my family, doesn't mean that we don't need to address the systematic issues around why every student doesn't at least have the opportunity to make that step for themselves. And giving them the social capital and the exposure around the conversations, the expectations for your life to be able to do that really helps them to even be exposed to those concepts, and that is something that is for them, not just something that they see on TV or that one or two people can do in my community, but that's not available for me. Yes, individual, family, and community social capital, all of that.
And that's a good point, Gail, that you mentioned, just really having access to those things, just knowing, because, in your example, the father didn't know to even engage their child into that conversation before the child came home and told them about what they've experienced, that exposure that they had. I find that that's the same situation that we have in the agriculture industry. If you look at leaders in the agriculture industry, they don't look like people that look like me. You may have some pockets, you may go to these land grant institutions that are 1890s, and you may see some leaders in there, which is only 19 or 20 land grants that are HBCUs compared to the 120 plus land grants across the country. But when you're looking at these higher level positions in agriculture, you don't see individuals like us, and mainly because when we start talking about agriculture to young people, especially people of color, they're thinking about cows and pigs and chickens. They're not thinking about the full depth of the agriculture industry. And because they don't have that exposure, they may have grown up in urban communities. I grew up in Philadelphia, North Philadelphia. We had urban cowboys. We had cowboys riding in the streets in the neighborhood, you know. And so I seen that. I grew up near Amish families. I saw that. But still, for me, my lens was farming. My lens was horses, you know, my lens was wearing cowboy hats. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. You know, I want to be an attorney. And so until we were exposed to that, and my first real exposure to the depth of the agriculture industry wasn't until I moved to Texas when I was 38 years old. And this is after attending Penn State, which is a land grant institution. Agriculture is abound there, 4-H was there, all of that stuff. I didn't even learn it there. I had to leave, go to Texas and find out about what the industry was really about. So when we're talking about social capital, sometimes we're sitting on this social capital, don't even know that we're there because no one's talking to us about it. And it's easy for them to not engage us in that because we're not going to ask the question. We don't even know what question to ask. And so what are we doing differently? And yes, Patricia, like look around the table and see who's missing, you know, and I recognize that on day one coming to UW, like who's missing? What are the partnerships haven't we had, you know, in the past? Like what are, you know, we need to reach out to these individuals. We need to reach out to these Pan-Hellenic, you know, organizations, the Delta Sigma Thetas, the, you know, Urban Leagues, the Omega Psi. Why aren't we using them? Because they're out there having an impact in our communities in a way that we could have never imagined in our land grant in the comfort of our small extension, and not recognizing the power of some of these other organizations. We need to bring them to the table, and they need to be representing our board of visitors. They need to be representing our board of advisors, and that we do not have in extension.
Thanks, Danielle. Thanks, everyone. We've got time for a few more questions.
I'll chime in with this idea of working on the child savings accounts, you know, with parents of young children and having some community investment in those accounts. One of the things specifically we are thinking about doing this summer, you know, our focus groups to dig in deeper with different communities in Wisconsin. So that would include, you know, African American and Native American and Hmong and different communities that we know are present across our state. So yeah, just wondering if any of you panelists have experience with doing focus groups with parents, and any advice that you might have for that, parents or students. You know, we're kind of new to this idea, and any feedback you can give us would be welcome. Thank you.
I just echo what the gentleman who left the call said. You know, investment brings people to the table because it shows value. And so when he was talking about that $100 a month or whatever, and having parents come and participate in something, partially because they're going to get not only the education, but the actual capital to begin to invest in their kids, and that's going to drive people to come. I have had an opportunity to see that work on a very much small scale in urban Chicago, where we were able to get a group of banks to come together and say that they would fund the first $50 of every kid's savings account and hold no fees against them and give them a debit card, as opposed to having them go to the currency exchange to cash their checks. And so just those very small things brought, you know, thousands of dollars to those young people, and an incentive for them to complete a financial literacy training program. Because that was the payoff, was that they got to go visit the bank, they met with the bank, they learned what banks do, and they got this initial deposit into their accounts. And so, you know, if we can think of ways to like literally invest in people, that could be productive.
That's a great idea. Banks are obligated to do community reinvestment. And I think most of them struggle to come up with creative ideas. Something along this line might be a possibility.
I just wanted to see if any of our panelists have anything you'd like to add to Chelsea's question.
I stepped away for a second, but I think this is the question about engaging in focus groups around saving for your child's education. Mm-hmm. So I think Dr. Thomas had talked a little bit about this earlier too, but it's just really important to be realistic and authentic about what it takes to save for college, if that's the goal, with a family, and how they could potentially actually reach, if it's $50,000 they're trying to save, etc. Because if not, then you kind of, that's how you kind of start to sow those seeds of distrust. And I wasted my time, right? You're telling me that I could come here and you're going to give me a plan, a 20-year plan to save $50,000 for my kid? Or are you saying I'm only going to be able to save 10, which, like Dr. Thomas said, is only going to give me 1 year? Then, you know, be authentic about that. And because then I'll feel like, well, this plan doesn't work because it only gets me a quarter of the way. So it's just about really understanding, or what is the goal, and then what is the step-by-step process for them to get there? Where is the resource pathway? It's one thing to present a pathway there, but is it resourced? So am I even going to be able to take the path? Am I too poor to even do what you're telling me the solution is to this big old problem that I've gotten, and now you're presenting me with a solution and I'm too poor to even explore or to do. So I think it'll just be important for you to make sure you're conscious of that when you're putting together your program. And I do have to go, I do have a 1:30 meeting, so I'm gonna log off in the next 2 minutes here, and just thank you everybody for being in. Appreciate being in the community with you on today. And I'll drop my email address in the chat if anybody wants to connect with me after.
Yeah, I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up. I want to say thank you, Mrs. Ford, Dr. Kankam, Ms. Miles, and Dr. Thomas for spending this amazing hour-and-a-half with us, an hour for Dr. Thomas. On behalf of the AERG and our colleagues, friends, and partners of the Division of Extension, we hope we can call upon you to continue to engage us in meaningful dialogue. As a reminder, we'll have the panelists' full bios and a recording of today's session on our SharePoint site. We hope that everyone has enjoyed yourself and will return for the next Wisdom Wednesday that will take place on May 12th at 12 o'clock. As a reminder, our speaker that day will be Will Latif Little, who will be presenting on the topic of emotional intelligence. Thank you to everyone who joined this live discussion today, and to those who will be watching the recording. Thank you for taking the time to watch this phenomenal discussion. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone, and see you next month.
Thank you.